Most organizations see leadership as a combination of two things: talent and work ethic. So as a result, they promote based on those two metrics, and they develop almost exclusively around the skills and the tools that might help that same talent be rediscovered in management. But there's one massive issue with this approach. It completely overlooks our humanity. And that's exactly why it rarely produces tangible impact. Well, welcome back to the Frontline Leadership Podcast, where we help frontline leaders become professional leaders that transform their business bottom lines in the process. I'm Craig Coyle, former Apache helicopter pilot, aerospace leader, and founder of Operation Lead. And today we're exploring what every new leader faces in their first 90 days. The identity crisis most workplaces leave them to face entirely alone. Let's dive in. So before we get into today's episode, I want to just briefly share where we are, where we're going, and what to expect with the podcast in the next few weeks and the next few months. Over the last 10 episodes, we've built the foundation. We talked about the why behind frontline leadership development. We explored the Lead Like a Pilot framework, and we looked at what a complete leadership operating system looks like when all three pillars are working together. If you've been with us from the beginning, you now have the blueprint. And these first 10 episodes will continue to serve as the foundation that we continue to come back to and continue to filter everything through as we discuss further concepts moving forward. There'll be a benchmark we continue to reference and continue to refer back to. So what comes next? Well, phase 2 of the podcast is about going inside that blueprint, pillar by pillar, challenge by challenge, getting specific about what great frontline leadership actually looks like and feels like in practice, and what your organization needs to build to make it real. Think of the launch series like an orientation. Well, now the orientation's over and we're diving in head first. I think there's no better place to start than the very first thing that happens to every new leader, whether that leader or your organization is ready for it or not. And I think my personal story, my experience as a new leader actually highlights this pretty well. See, I was very successful as an individual, and I worked my rear end off to get there. High school valedictorian, multi-sport athlete, top of my class at West Point within a very challenging and rigorous engineering program, flight school honor graduate, and Apache pilot, and I accomplished all of this by the time I was 23 years old. I thought I had the world figured out. And the next step was my first management position. My confidence was at an all-time high, as you could probably imagine. See, I went into that position assuming the things that made me successful before would be enough. You could probably guess how that worked out for me. See, within weeks, I felt something that at the time I didn't really have words for, or couldn't really put words to. The things I'd always relied on, my technical knowledge and competence, my work ethic and commitment, the confidence I had built up over the course of years of being successful, none of it translated the way I expected when I became a manager. I was working harder than I ever had, and yet it wasn't working. Then I'd try even harder, and things would only get worse. See, if you're a leader listening to this, maybe you remember feeling and living in that tension too. See, what I didn't know then is that what I was experiencing wasn't a performance problem. It was an identity crisis. The promotion didn't just change my title, it changed the rules. The skills that made me valuable and successful as an individual contributor were no longer sufficient on their own. And nobody told me that was coming. What I've realized since is that experience wasn't unique to me, and it's not unique to you either. And it's the single most predictable moment in any new leader's career. Overcome it, and you'll likely succeed. Never realize it, and you'll continue to desperately struggle against it. And most organizations walk right past it. This unfriendly welcome into leadership has 3 faces, and until you can name them, you can't address them. So let's start there. The first challenge is what I like to call the competence crisis. Your new supervisor was promoted because they were exceptional. They knew the work, they owned it. That competence was their professional identity. It's what made them successful. Then, overnight, the job changed completely. Now they're responsible for other people's performance, not just their own. They're responsible for navigating conversations that they've never had to have. Now they have to make decisions they've never been faced with before. Now they're managing dynamics that they've never been trained for. And the quiet questions underneath all of this that new leaders are always asking are things like, am I actually capable of this? What do I need to do? How do I get good at this? What does it look like? They will rarely say that out loud, but if nobody addresses it, they'll handle it the only way they know how. Probably the same way I handle it. Work harder and try harder. And when that doesn't work, and we all know it won't, it silently erodes their confidence, and eventually it shows up in the performance systems we probably promoted them into this position to overcome in the first place. Okay, challenge number 2 is the relationship rupture. Yesterday, they were part of a team, same lunch table, same peer group. Today, they're the boss. That shift doesn't happen gradually. It literally happens overnight. And what goes with it, the belonging, the informal trust, the social infrastructure built over months or probably years, disappears almost immediately. They didn't just get a new job title. They lost their tribe. The loneliness of that transition is one of the most underestimated forces in frontline leadership. It affects decision-making, communication, and the willingness to lead with conviction when it's hard and when it matters the most. And challenge number 3 is the expectation gap. Let's be real. Almost immediately, 3 things happen when someone gets promoted. The organization expects them to generate results. Their team expects them to have answers. And they expect themselves to figure it all out quickly. Because often asking for help feels like we're admitting that we weren't ready for this role in the first place. 3 expectations, all misaligned with the reality of what it actually takes to grow into a leadership role. And that gap, it's not going to close on its own. Actually, it's probably only going to widen until something breaks. Here's what I'm hoping you're starting to realize. Most organizations never name any of these 3 challenges, which means their new supervisors spend months, years, fighting an enemy they can't see, all by themselves, even if they're being developed with management skills and tools by the organization. The organizations that develop great frontline leaders do something fundamentally different. They treat the promotion as the beginning of a development journey, not the finish line of one. They see the transition into leadership through a humanistic lens, and they address each of these 3 challenges directly, deliberately, before the performance systems ever show up. So how do you do this? First, the competence crisis is addressed by naming it, by sitting down with a new supervisor early, before they're drowning, and saying what you're feeling right now or what you're about to go through is normal. The job changed. The thoughts and skills that got you here, yes, they're valuable and important, but they're not sufficient on their own anymore. Here's what the new job requires. And here's how we're going to help you. Here's how we're going to guide you to success. That conversation alone transforms an invisible enemy into a known challenge, and known challenges can be solved. Second, the relationship rupture is addressed by building new relationships intentionally before the old ones disappear or reemerge. This means actively connecting new supervisors with peers navigating the same transition into leadership, with leaders who've been where they are, come out the other side, successful, growing, developed. It's about creating the relational infrastructure that replaces what the promotion took away. Because when you don't, new supervisors either try to maintain their old peer relationships, which is either going to undermine their authority or compromise their conviction when it's needed the most, or they're going to go it alone. And we all know isolated leaders make worse decisions, avoid hard conversations, and inevitably burn out faster. And then third, the expectation gap is addressed by setting honest developmental expectations in the organization, not just performance expectations. Telling new supervisors not just what the job requires, but what the journey requires. That it's going to feel uncomfortable before it ever feels natural. That asking for help is actually professionalism, not weakness. That growth is a process, and that the organization is invested in that process, not just the outcome it might bring. When those expectations are set early, the pressure doesn't disappear, but it becomes navigable. We're giving them a path to follow, and we're calling out the challenges. So name the challenges, build the relationships, and set honest expectations. 3 deliberate acts. And here's what's striking about them. Not a single one is skill training. All 3 are something deeper. We cover the concept of flight school in episodes 6 and 7. Go back and reference them if you'd like to. But those 3 acts are exactly what flight school is designed to do, both formally at the onset and then informally throughout. Now, flight school isn't only about identical work. It's not therapy. It's not a feelings conversation dressed up in a leadership framework. But flight school is where identity and skill development happen simultaneously. And that combination is actually what makes it work and what makes it so powerful. Think about how military aviation does this. Ground school teaches student pilots the principles, the systems, and the frameworks that they're going to rely on when everything else is uncertain. Then flight training builds specific, repeatable skills through deliberate practice, progressive challenge, and real-time feedback. See, both tracks, they're running at the same time, but they feed off each other, and it's intentional, it's purposeful. That's the whole model. And it translates directly into leadership development. First, we address the identity crisis, this transformation journey. We address it up front. We name the challenges. We reset the relational context. We begin to build a new professional identity. We give new leaders the why behind every step we're going to guide them through. And then we can build the tangible mindsets, concepts, skills that this identity can then stand on. Things like how to communicate with clarity, how to set expectations that stick, how to have the hard conversations, how to lead people who used to be your peers. See, neither component works without the other. Skills training without psychological clarity produces leaders who know what to do, but then don't believe they're the person who should be doing it. And then similarly, identity work without skill development produces leaders who feel ready, but then have nothing to reach for when it matters most. Flight school captures both, and that's why it's such a critical starting point. When it works, new supervisors, new leaders stop asking if they're cut out for this, and they start asking, what kind of leader do I want to become? And they have the real tools in their hands at their disposal when they ask that question. So yes, the following pillars, pre-flight gives them operational systems and daily rhythms to lead consistency, and progression is going to surround them with community and structure and guidance to keep them growing. But neither of those pillars work without the right foundation. To put it simply, you cannot build a leadership operating system on top of an unresolved identity crisis crippling the leaders across your organization. The identity transformation has to come first, and it won't happen by accident. It only happens by design. So if you're a frontline leader, a supervisor, a manager, and today's episode names something you've been carrying without the words for it, I encourage you to start with the Leaders Pre-Flight Checklist, which you can grab at operationlead.com/checklist. It's free, it's practical, and I think it's your first concrete step towards the very things that bring competence as a leader to life. And if you're a senior leader and you're starting to see the transition your new supervisors, your new managers go through in a different light, visit operationlead.com and click on Learn About Our System and Process. Let's talk about what it looks like to build something that actually meets your people in this moment. Look, every new leader faces the same 3 challenges: the competence crisis, the relationship rupture, and the expectation gap. Together, they create an identity crisis. They're predictable, they're universal, and they're almost entirely invisible until the performance symptoms show up and it's already too late. The organizations that develop great frontline leaders, they're not lucky. They're deliberate and intentional. And they see the transition into leadership for what it is, a defining developmental moment. And they build systems that meet their people where they are and guide them on a journey, not just of skill development, but identity transformation. Over the next several episodes, we're going to continue unpacking the often overlooked critical first steps in leader development. We'll start with the mindset shifts every new supervisor has to make before any system or tool or skill will enhance their leadership. Until then, let's start addressing and overcoming this identity crisis. I'm Craig Coyle, and this is the Frontline Leadership Podcast. Let's do it.